Do your eye drawings look more like this than this? Would you believe that all of these drawings are mine? Because they absolutely are. I was not born with the ability to draw. I had to learn to draw realistic, memorable eyes. And the great news is, you can too. In this two-part video, you'll discover the 6 most common mistakes that decrease the realism of your eye drawings. Most importantly, you'll learn how to fix or avoid these mistakes altogether. To dive deeper into this topic with me and really transform your eye drawings as I have and as my students have, don't miss my eye drawing intensive, which I will link to in the description box below. Let's get started with most common mistake 1. Mistake 1 is assuming that eyes are shaped like almonds or goldfish crackers and drawing them that way. In drawing, specific shapes create likeness or resemblance. Specific shapes are what make our drawing look specifically like the person that we're drawing. So what happens when our shapes are inaccurate? Best case scenario, if your shapes are just a little bit off, your eyes might still look realistic, but they won't resemble the individual that you're drawing. They won't resemble their unique eyes. Worst case scenario, if your shapes and proportions are completely inaccurate, your drawing might terrify your audience and maybe even yourself. Unlike some drawing subjects, portrait drawing is not forgiving. For example, if your proportions and shapes are slightly off when drawing a still life like this flower, it's still believable and realistic, right? It's not the specific flower that you were drawing, but without seeing the reference photo, you can't even tell. No problem. But what happens if our shapes or proportions are slightly off in a portrait drawing? Yikes. Suddenly, we have a mildly horrifying caricature of our model. With advanced subjects like the figure and portrait, we can't get away with much. We must learn to observe, analyze, and draw the shapes of our subject sensitively. It's not that eyes aren't at all almond-shaped. There is a resemblance. The issue is that assuming eyes are almond-shaped usually leads to generic shapes, and therefore generic eye drawings that just are not quite realistic or believable. Look how distinctly unique all of these eye shapes are. Simply almond-shaped? I think not. That simply does not do justice to the nuances of this feature. To draw realistic eyes that look recognizably like those of our model, we must pay attention to the tilt of the eye, the widths and heights of the eye, and where specific angle changes occur. I've used straight lines here to point out the distinct angle changes in each eye shape. Now that you're seeing how unique each eye shape is, how do you draw it specifically rather than generically? Try following these steps. First, start your eye drawings by indicating the tilt of the eye. Notice that each eye here is at a particular angle. If we don't establish that early on in our drawing, it will be very difficult to create later. When drawing an eye, often the first line I draw indicates the tilt of this shape, or the tilt of the eye in general. I visualize this line extending from approximately one corner of the eye to the other, and then I mimic its angle on my drawing using angle sighting. Next, let's notice what's included in this shape between the eyelids. The sclera, the white of the eye, the pupil, the iris and the cornea, which is the transparent cover on top of the iris, the two forms in the inner corner of the eye, the lacrimal caruncle and the plica semilunaris. We study anatomy so that we know what to look for. For example, often students don't leave enough space for these two forms in the inner corner of the eye, simply because they can't see them. They don't notice that the two corners of the eye are very different. That's a little bonus mistake for you to avoid. Often, we can't see what we don't know to look for. We will cover essential eye anatomy needed to draw realistic, believable eyes in Module 1 of my eye drawing intensive. It is so much fun to learn, and just studying anatomy will completely change what you see when you observe an eye. Step 2 is to analyze the widths and heights of this shape. Where is it the tallest? Where is it the widest? An easy way to determine this is to imagine this shape fitting perfectly into a rectangle, where the rectangle touches the highest point, the lowest point, the rightmost point, and the leftmost point of the shape. Now we have 4 boundaries or high points of this shape, as well as the overall height and width. Let's mark the high points because they'll be important later. Notice that the highest and lowest points are at an angle to each other. Once you've found the general height and width, indicate it lightly on your drawing to give this shape boundaries. Step 3. Find the major angle changes in this shape. Finding angle changes is a skill that takes practice. Here are a few tips and ways to go about it. We've already found the high points or boundaries of this shape. Conveniently, there are usually major angle changes at the high points. Can you see them? At each one of these points, the line changes direction. That's what an angle change is. Next, can you see any other angle changes? They might be more subtle than the first ones. I see one here, 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 and here. If you're not quite seeing the angle changes, that's okay. Try asking yourself, how would I draw this eye using only straight lines and as few lines as possible? No curving lines. This is important because it will force you to decide where to end one line and where to start the next one, and likely you'll do that at the angle changes. Curving lines too early results in generic shapes and generic drawings. So, how would you draw this eye using as few lines as possible? I started with a shape that looks like this. And then I made it more specific by subdividing it into smaller angle changes. This is an excellent starting point because we've identified the tilt of the eye, the widths and heights of the eye, and where the specific angle changes are. This is already not a generic almond shape or goldfish shape. Step 4 is to find and draw the even more subtle angle changes in this shape, and to finally start curving some lines. But I don't do that until much later in the drawing process, once I've added more information to my drawing. Before we move on to mistake 2, hi, my name is Marina. I'm a professional visual artist, arts educator, and founder of thedrawingsource.com, which is dedicated to helping you achieve new levels of realism in your drawings. The second common mistake I see is not noticing or drawing the thickness of the upper and lower eyelids. To make sure we're on the same page, the eyelids are the upper and lower folds of skin that protect the eye and keep the eye moist. Each eye has an upper eyelid and a lower eyelid. Key point here, the eyelids have a thickness. This gives each eyelid 2 planes that we must notice and show in our drawings. The upper eyelid has a front plane and a bottom plane. The lower eyelid has a front plane and a top plane. If we leave these planes out of our drawing, it will not look believable or realistic because these planes create a sense of depth and dimension. They're also anatomically correct. Because we look each other in the eyes every day, we know when something looks off or strange in a drawing, even if we're not sure why. So this will not go unnoticed. However, these planes are often missed in eye drawings because they can be tricky to locate. How much we see of each plane depends on many factors. On the position of the model's head and where they're looking, on how open the model's eyes are, the type of eyelids they have, the tautness of the skin, even the eyelashes will often obscure these planes to some degree. So how do we locate them and avoid this common eye drawing mistake? Let's start with the upper eyelid. Because it has 2 planes, a front plane and a bottom plane, it can have up to 3 lines for us to draw. When we see both planes of the upper eyelid, often there will be a top line, a middle line separating the front plane from the bottom plane, and a third line where the bottom plane contacts the eyeball. The eyelashes grow out of the middle line that separates the front plane from the bottom plane. That's often very helpful in locating that angle change. When eyelashes are sparse or not very visible, we look for a value change instead, a difference in lightness and darkness between the two planes. The lower eyelid is similar. From a front view, it also has 2 planes, a front plane and a top plane. When we can see both planes, the lower eyelid will also have up to 3 lines for us to draw. Here, the top line indicates where the eyelid contacts the eyeball. It's right up against it. The middle line separates the top plane from the front plane, and the third line closes off the front plane. Often this line will trail off or fade out. It's not usually defined the entire way around. Again, the eyelashes grow out of the middle line separating the top plane from the bottom plane, which can greatly help us locate that angle change. When eyelashes are sparse or not very visible, again we look for a value shift, a difference in lightness and darkness between the 2 planes. We started with this example because these lines are very clear on this individual in this pose. But we will not always see all 3 lines, or both planes of the upper and lower eyelid. That depends on many factors. For example, on the type of eyelids our model has, and on the position of their eyes and head. Where the lines appear can also be dramatically different from one person to the next, because our eyes are all so unique. So we want to use these 3 lines as a starting point to help us find the planes of the eyelids. When observing an eye, ask yourself, can I see the 3 lines in the upper eyelid? If yes, where specifically are they on this individual? If you cannot see all 3 lines, why not? What's happening in this scenario? For example, the head might be tilted up or down, obscuring one of the planes. Which lines can you see? Finally, based on what you discovered through the questions above, determine where are the planes of the upper and lower eyelid. That should help you draw the planes of the eyelids, adding depth, dimension, and realism to your drawings. You can even start by exploring your own eyes in a mirror. Let me know in the comments below if you can see the 3 lines and the 2 planes of each eyelid. Now you know that to draw stunning, realistic eyes, you must notice and draw specific, not generic shapes, and the planes of the eyelids. But there are 4 more common eye drawing mistakes that I see all the time that I strongly suggest that you avoid. We will cover those in parts 2 and 3 of this video series. Subscribe to this channel below to be notified when part 2 arrives next week. In the meantime, you may also be interested in my video on how to transform your eye drawings. In it, I share how my student made this tremendous progress in only 4 weeks, and how you can too. There's a link to the video in the description box below, and I will see you there.